Welcome to the Shorten Anime channel. Today we'll dive into the latest episode of The Great Ruler. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support the channel. The Great Ruler, Season 1, Episode 34. You don't know what happened? Wenling could not help but ask as Muchen's confusion showed. Muchen frowned. He vaguely remembered that he seemed to have entered a certain state earlier. However, he was not particularly clear about what had just happened. Earlier, you have entered the heart array state, Wenling said softly. Heart array state? Muchen was surprised. It is a mysterious state you would only be able to touch after you become a rank 3 spiritual array master. At that time, you will be able to get rid of the binds of the naked eye and use your heart to observe the array. All of the trajectories of the spiritual array would be within your heart, and it will move based on your thoughts. Wenling stared at Muchen and said, an accident occurred for the spirit convergence array earlier, and it was going to fail. However, it seems that you have unconsciously saved it. Muchen was slightly stunned. He seemed to have remembered that the spirit convergence array had completely reflected itself within his heart. Moreover, the originally completed spiritual array seemed to have a flaw at the final moment. Then, at a conditioned reflex, he seemed to have done something to it. So that is called heart array state. Curiosity filled Muchen's eyes. Under that state, he could feel that it has become a lot easier to arrange a spiritual array, and the spiritual energy light beams would move based on his thoughts. The feeling like how water floods in made him feel extremely comfortable. However, based on your appearance, it seems that you have unconsciously entered that mysterious state. You must try to comprehend that feeling more. If you are able to control whether or not you can enter the heart array state, it will greatly benefit your spiritual array cultivation. Wenling smacked his lips. This time he could not conceal the jealousy within his tone. The heart array state, it is a state that many spiritual array masters would dream of. Even he had never experienced it before. Beside him, Chen Ling and the other spiritual array master also stared at Muchen with a complex expression. They did not have the slightest mentality of looking down on him. They understood that the boy in front of them was probably at a completely different level. Perhaps in the near future, they would be looking up at the boy who had once humbly asked for advice. Haha, thank you everybody. You've done a great deed to the Mu territory since you've constructed the rank 2 spirit convergence array this time. At this moment, Mu Feng walked in from the outside with a delighted expression. Then he cupped his fist and thanked Wenling, Chen Ling, and the other. Wenling let out a faint smile. Moreover, Chen Ling and the others had slightly reddened faces. They had nearly ruined the entire thing. If it wasn't for Mu Chen entering the heart array state, they would probably cause the Mu territory to have a major loss. Territory Lord Mu. The ones who perform the majority of this service are Brother Wen and the Little Lord, Chen Ling said embarrassedly. Mr. Chen Ling, what are you saying? There is no size of this service. Without the three of you, how could we have arranged this spirit convergence array? Mu Feng said in a stern voice. Hearing this, Chen Ling and the others also emotionally cuffed their hands. They did not have arrogance within their eyes anymore. For Mu Feng to be the Mu territory's lord, his tolerance was really impressive. In the future, they might decide to move around the Mu territory more. Furthermore, Mu Chen's talent in spiritual array cultivation was extremely terrifying. He will reach a staggering height in this aspect. At that time, they would benefit greatly if they were able to get some pointers from him. Mu Chen also quietly smiled when he saw Mu Feng's act of winning them over. His own father was quite crafty. There aren't many spiritual array masters in the Northern spiritual realm. If they were able to rope in 3 rank 1 spiritual array master, it would be a considerable assistance. Because Wenling and the others have also consumed a lot of strength due to the rank 2 spirit convergence array, Mu Feng only talked with them briefly before sending them off so they could rest. Afterwards, he let out a sigh of relief and smiled as he stared at Muchen beside him. Good boy, it's all thanks to you this time. You are my father, of course I have to help you. Muchen grinned as he spoke. Damn brat. Mu Feng scolded him for a moment before rubbing Muchen's head. He sighed and said, if you want to help me, then hurry and get admitted to the 5 great academies. The Northern spiritual realm may seem very big, but we are only a group of visionless toads sitting within a well. You will only be qualified to become a true powerhouse if you obtain the resources and education from the 5 great academies. Your talent far surpasses me, your father. Therefore, you will walk much farther than me, and you will be able to do things that your father cannot do. Mufeng muttered to himself, "You are all my hope." Muchen stared at Mufeng's gentle and comforting eyes and smiled. "Dad, relax. I have said it before. There will be a day when I bring Mother back." Mufeng laughed. He only felt that his eyes started to become obscure and firmly nodded his head. He believed that his son would never let him down. "I'll head back to the Northern Spiritual Academy tomorrow." After calculating the time, the spaces within the 5 great academies should have been sent over by now. "I'll see how many spaces were assigned to the Northern Spiritual Academy this time." Muchen stretched his waist, and his black eyes stared at the red glow on the horizon. An elegant and soft figure was reflected within the depths of his eyes. She seemed to have long silver hair, as well as a pair of glass-like eyes. Her exquisite and tiny face, which would definitely create a calamity in the future, would often be covered with a coldness that separated others away from her. However, only he knew how gentle she was underneath that coldness. The 5 great academies. I really have to go there. The next day, after Mu Chen said farewell to Mufeng, he used the Mu Territory's transfer spiritual array to hurry back to Northern Spiritual City. However, he did not stay within the city for long and headed straight back to the Northern Spiritual Academy. At this moment, 3 figures were sitting up straight in a study within the Northern Spiritual Academy. The principal of the Northern Spiritual Academy, Xiao Mu, was in the front. Behind him on the left and right were the 2 highest level of instructors within the Northern Spiritual Academy, Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi. The spaces for the 5 great academy have been sent over. Within Principal Xiao's hand, he held a golden picture scroll. On the picture scroll, there were 5 different, yet extremely oppressive emblems. These 5 emblems represent the 5 great academies. "How many spaces did our Northern Spiritual Academy obtain this time?" Teacher Mo asked interestedly. Principal Xiao's dry fingers gently touched the golden picture scroll within his hand. He said with a strange expression, "5 entries." "5?" Teacher Mo thought for a moment before saying, "There are only 5 students within the East Branch who would be eligible to reach the spiritual rotation stage in a short period of time. As for the West Branch, there will probably be 7 students. It seems that there will be a fierce competition for it." Principal Xiao nodded his head. The requirements for the 5 great academies were quite harsh. It isn't a place where you can enter just by wanting to enter it. Moreover, aside from these 5 entries, there is a special entry. Principal Xiao's expression became increasingly strange as he stared at Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi. "A special entry?" Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi stared and puzzled at Principal Xiao. "It is a seeded class entry," Principal Xiao said as he lowered the golden picture scroll within his hand. "A seeded class entry?" Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi's faces finally became serious, and they could not help but ask, how could they hand over this sort of entry to our Northern Spiritual Academy? The 5 great academies entries were divided into 3 classes. The lowest class was the ordinary entries. The second level was the seeded class entries. Right now, the Northern Spiritual Academy had received this type of special entry. However, these entries would only be obtained by powerful academies. A spiritual academy like the Northern Spiritual Academy should never obtain this level of entry. The highest level entry was the core entries. It is extremely rare, and everyone who earned it were monster-like existences. Only the most dazzling individuals in the spiritual road would be able to obtain it. Moreover, these entries were not just a name. It would also provide you an identity after you've decided which one of the 5 great academies you'll enter. The status and resources you'll obtain would depend on it. Thus, many people would fight to the bitter end in order to obtain this high-class entry. A seeded class entry. After including all the spiritual academies, there will only be 20 of them within the 100 spirit heavens. I can't believe that one would actually land in our Northern Spiritual Academy's hands. Principal Xiao let out a strange laugh, as if it was incomprehensible. 100 spirit heavens is the vast land outside of the Northern Spiritual Realm. Within the 100 spirit heavens, there were dozens of large and small realms, and the Northern Spiritual Realm was only a relatively weak realm. Therefore, the Northern Spiritual Academy would not be able to obtain an advantage over all the other spiritual academies within the 100 spirit heavens. If it was in the past, this seeded class entry would definitely be divided through the other powerful spiritual academies within the 100 spirit heavens. How could it be their turn? I've heard a little bit of information. This seeded class entry was probably allocated to us directly due to a decision of the 5 great academies. Principal Xiao said faintly. "Oh? A decision from the 5 great academies?" Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi exchanged gazes with each other. Just what sort of existence are the five great academies? Why would they take care of a measly Northern Spiritual Academy? Moreover, they did not have any powerful figures within the five great academies. We aren't the ones that obtained it. Principal Xiao narrowed his eyes slightly. I think that it might be a certain student within the Northern Spiritual Academy who has attracted the attention of the five great academies. Student? Teacher Mo and Tekahura Shi was stunned. Then their eyes immediately lit up. It's Mu Chen? Within the entire Northern Spiritual Realm, Mu Chen was the only one who had participated in the spiritual road. Moreover, he had surprisingly been kicked out halfway. This was extremely difficult to understand, and also made thoughts flash through other people's mind. Just what on earth did Mu Chen do in the spiritual road? Principal Xiao slowly nodded his head and said, "It should be that little guy." The five great academies kicked him out of the spiritual road, yet they purposely handed a seated class entry to us. What is the meaning of this? Is it to compensate him, or are they reluctant to let him go? Reluctant to let him go? To the five great academies, what genius haven't they seen? It's only Mu Chen. It shouldn't be enough, right? Teacher Shi frowned. Teacher Mo let out a faint smile and said, "You should not underestimate a person who killed a vicious individual who was at the spiritual rotation stage late phase by relying on his spiritual movement stage late phase strength." Principal Xiao smiled and waved his head as he said, "We should not care what the five great academies are thinking of. Since they handed this entry to us, we should just take it." "Then what about the entry? Should we hand it directly to Mu Chen?" Teacher Mo inquired. Principal Xiao shook his head and said, "That would only lead to dissatisfaction with the other students. Moreover, if the territory lords within the Northern Spiritual Academy knew that we actually have a seated class entry, wouldn't they all be envious of it? If we handed it to Mu Chen, they would all be filled with fury and say that we were unfair." Then, Principal Xiao stood up and let out a faint smile as he said, "We'll follow the rules. Strength is supreme. We will hand over this seated class entry to whoever is the strongest. Although it is possible that it was prepared for Mu Chen, he can only blame himself if he does not have the strength." As he said this, he waved his hand. "Convey the news out. I think that many little guys would go crazy about it." Ho ho, a seated class entry. It is the first one since the establishment of the Northern Spiritual Academy in Northern Spiritual Academy, East Branch, Training Grounds. It was evident that the training grounds were quite lively today. It seems that every East Branch Heaven class student came. This is because today was the day that the Northern Spiritual Academy would announce the amount of entries for the five great academies. Most of the students who came to train in the Northern Spiritual Academy came for the entries of the five great academies. They would work hard year after year in order to use the Northern Spiritual Academy as a stepping stone and enter the rumored five great academies. When Mu Chen entered the training grounds, he was startled by the loud noise. He looked at the tightly packed heads and secretly smacked his lips. He never imagined that there will be so many students in the East Branch's Heaven class. "Mu Chen, over here!" Not far away, a girl's sweet voice rang out. Mu Chen turned his gaze over and saw Tang Qianer waving her slender hands at him. The moving smile on her pretty face attracted a lot of attention from the youths nearby. Mu Chen also directed a smile towards Tang Qianer and walked over. They had not met in a month. This young girl has increasingly become more slim and graceful. Although she was dressed in black training clothes, it is still possible to see her exquisite curves. "I haven't seen you in 1 month, yet why do I feel that you've changed a bit?" Tang Qianer tilted her head and asked in surprise as she glanced at Mu Chen. After all, Mu Chen had stepped into the spiritual rotation stage. Even though he had not revealed it, a girl is indeed perceptive and could still feel a little bit of change. "I nearly died inside the Black Eerie Swamp. Of course, I'll change a bit." Mu Chen smiled and said, "You also went to the Black Eerie Swamp? I heard from my father that the Mu territory seemed to have fought with the Liu territory within the Black Eerie Swamp. I never imagined that you would have gone as well. Are you okay?" Tang Qianer frowned and asked. Mu Chen shook his head. It seems on that day the commotion within the Black Eerie Swamp was quite large. Even the Tang territory had received news about it. However, it seems that they did not know that the commotion was caused by the Nine Netherbird's evolution. "Brother Mu!" A shout suddenly rang out from nearby. He noticed that Mo Ling, Tan Qingshan and the others all walked over with a smile. It seems that they have seriously trained during this month and appeared to be darker, especially Mo Ling. Muchen could feel that the spiritual energy within his body had become increasingly dense. It was only a step away from advancing to spiritual rotation stage. Hey, Brother Mu. It's all thanks to the jaded essence fruit you gave me last time. I will probably reach the spiritual rotation stage soon. When that happens, I'll leave you behind. Mo Ling directed a smile at Muchen and spoke. Muchen smiled as he glanced at him. He was too lazy to correct him. I wonder how many entries the Northern Spiritual Academy will receive. Last time, it seemed to be 3 entries only. The East and West branch fought to the bitter end for those 3 entries. Mo Ling licked his lips. His eyes twinkled as he talked about the entries. It was apparent that he really wanted it. Muchen also nodded his head. But just when he was about to speak, he heard a commotion coming from behind. He turned his head around and noticed 2 figures slowly walking over. Huh? It's Chen Fan and Huo Yun. So these 2 guys finally decided to appear. Mo Ling whispered as he looked at the 2 men and was a little surprised. Hearing this, Muchen was also shocked. He glanced at the 2 individuals for a moment. When he was in the Earth class, he had heard of these 2 names. Based on their strength, they were probably at the pinnacle of the East Branch's Heaven class. They were only slightly weaker than Lu Mubai. However, they were rather low-key and would rarely appear in the Northern Spiritual Academy. Therefore, their names would never appear in the rankings. It was rumored that they joined an adventurers team and would often hunt spiritual beasts, Mo Ling said. Only then, Muchen nodded his head suddenly. No wonder he could feel a faint smell of blood from them. Moreover, from their calm eyes, it was indeed different from the youthful students nearby. Most likely, these 2 individuals have already attempted to charge into the spiritual rotation stage, Muchen said softly. He could feel that the spiritual energy fluctuation from their bodies were even stronger than Mo Ling. It seems that they have gradually condensed a spiritual wheel. It's those 2, Tang Xianer whispered as her beautiful eyes stared at them. Muchen could hear that her tone had changed and could not help but glance at her in confusion. Hey, Brother Mu. Chen Fan and Huo Yun knew each other since they were young. Both of them had fought against each other as they grew up. Moreover, they both fell in love with Qianer after entering the Northern Spiritual Academy and would often fight with each other because of her. However, they were both rejected by her in the end. Then these 2 grouped together and joined an adventurers team to train. They said that they would court her again after they obtained the entries for the 5 great academies, Mo Ling whispered on the side. Muchen was stunned. He immediately glanced with a funny expression at Tang Xianer, who had a red face. The attractiveness of the East Branch's flower really couldn't be covered, and would come wave after wave. While Muchen was talking with Mo Ling, Chen Fan and Huo Yun also looked over to this side. To be exact, they saw Tang Xianer beside Muchen, and a smile emerged on their indifferent faces as they walked quickly over. Seeing that they were coming for her, Tang Xianer helplessly bit her lips and hid her body behind Muchen. This tiny action made Chen Fan and Huo Yun completely stunned. They immediately fixated their gaze over at Muchen. Chen Fan's gaze was still all right, but Huo Yun had an ill gaze. You should be Muchen, right? I've heard of your name before, so we finally meet today. Chen Fan gave a faint smile at Muchen and held out his hand. Nice to meet you. Muchen also replied with a smile and glanced at Chen Fan's outstretched hand. Then he immediately shook it. The moment when the 2 hands clasped with each other, spiritual energy surged out from Chen Fan's palm, and the veins jumped on the arm that gripped Muchen's hand. Muchen could feel a powerful squeeze coming from the palm and helplessly shook his head. He did not resist and allowed Chen Fan to utilize his strength. However, his face did not have the slightest movement. Chen Fan, what are you doing? Tang Xianer also noticed this scene and immediately frowned and shouted out. Chen Fan stared at the trace of ridicule at the corner of Muchen's mouth and frowned as well. This Muchen really had some ability. Oh ho, Qianer. I only had a teasing inclination. It's been a while since such an amazing person has appeared in our East Branch. Chen Fan retracted back his hand and smiled at Tang Qianer. Brother Muchen probably didn't mind, right? Chen Fan looked at Muchen. If it's only this amount of strength, naturally, I wouldn't mind. Muchen smiled and said, then we definitely should have a duel sometime. Huo Yun challenged Muchen as he spoke. We'll talk about it when you have the chance. Muchen did not make any comments and ignored these 2 individuals as he walked toward the direction of the training grounds. On the other hand, Tang Qian'er gave off a fierce glare at the two of them before following Mu Chen. Could Qian'er have fallen in love with that boy? Wouldn't we have benefited someone else because we were fighting with each other all the time? Huo Yun glanced at Tang Qian'er's figure and muttered, "That will depend if he has the ability to let us allow him to do so." Chen Fan rubbed his chin and said, "Let's find an opportunity to beat him up," Huo Yun said. "Okay." Chen Fan smiled and nodded his head. More and more students appeared in the training ground. After approximately 30 minutes, a familiar figure slowly walked out. The commotions at this place instantly quieted down and stared eagerly at Teacher Mo, who walked over to the training grounds. Teacher Mo glanced at the tightly packed heads and let out a faint smile. He cut straight to the point and said, "This time, the Northern Spiritual Academy has received five Great Academies entries." 5? An uproar suddenly burst out within the training grounds. Although there were more entries than last time, it was still quite short in supply for the qualified students. Moreover, Teacher Mo's eyes suddenly glanced at Mu Chen and said, "Aside from the 5 entries, we also have a seated class entry." A seated class entry? All sounds seemed to have disappeared within the training grounds as looks of astonishment were directed at Teacher Mo. After a long period of them, a few people fiercely inhaled a breath. Even Chen Fan and Huo Yun took in a deep breath. Mu Chen was probably the only person who remained calm. A seated class entry was indeed quite rare. However, if he had successfully completed the spiritual road, he would have probably obtained an even higher class entry. Only the strongest student within the Northern Spiritual Academy would qualify to obtain this seated class entry. Therefore, if you want to obtain it, you must defeat all other competitors. Teacher Mo stared at the shocked students and glanced once again at the calm Mu Chen. He smiled and said, "Within our East Branch Heaven class, there are only 5 individuals who are qualified to compete for it. They are Chen Fan, Huo Yun, Mo Ling, Tang Qian'er, and Mu Chen." After hearing these 5 names, regretful sighs rang out from within the training grounds. However, they also understood. The ones who qualified for it must possess the ability to reach the spiritual rotation stage in a short period of time. In this location, only these 5 individuals would meet this requirement. For the next month, I will personally guide the 5 of you individually and allow you to complete the final step and advance into the spiritual rotation stage, Teacher Mo said in a deep voice. "Yes!" Hearing this, Mo Ling and the others nodded excitedly. Teacher Mo was a spirit stage powerhouse. If he was to personally guide them, their cultivation would be smoother. However, Mu Chen smiled helplessly and hesitated for a moment before holding up his hand. "Mu Chen, do you have a question?" Seeing Mu Chen raise his head, he asked in confusion. "Teacher Mo, that step is probably unnecessary for me." Teacher Mo was stunned. He immediately guessed what that meant, and his eyes fixated itself onto Mu Chen's body. Then he could feel the spiritual energy fluctuation within the latter's body was different than the rest of the students. "You've advanced to the spiritual rotation stage?" Teacher Mo exclaimed. Sounds of wowing erupted out from nearby. Not only did Tang Qian'er, Mo Ling, and the others stare in shock at Mu Chen, even Chen Fan and Huo Yun opened their mouths slightly. This guy actually reached the spiritual rotation stage already? That wraps up the content for today's episode. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel to get notifications for the next episode. For now, goodbye, and see you next time.